evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paul Stevens. I'm the chair of BCS Nottingham and Derby. And tonight we're doing a joint event with CiiSec. My colleague, Colin Robbins, who will introduce himself in a few minutes. We've got a number of speakers to discuss how COVID-19 infected information security. We have got we did plan to have 4 speakers tonight, but one of them has not managed to attend so far. So we're just going to juggle the agenda a bit. So first speaker is going to be Tony Smith, and then we're going to keep going and see if David Alexander joins. So there will be a break about halfway through, just for about 10 to 15 minutes, just to allow you to stretch your legs. And at the end, after the last speaker has delivered their presentation, we will have a Q&A panel, which will be led by my colleague, Gary Leffman, who's the producer tonight in the background, and he'll be asking the questions. Q&A will be done by you submitting questions in the control panel. You should be able to see a questions pane and possibly also a chat pane if you want to raise any points but don't necessarily want to ask a question. But if you want questions to be asked at the end, please submit it in the questions pane. We try to look at diversity and inclusion. If you could get your phone cameras out and just scan this and just fill in a short questionnaire for us for our inclusion and diversity officer, we'd be very grateful. So I'll just hold that there for a few seconds while you do that. Okay. I just want to also raise the fact we've got a new website in terms of BCS Nottingham and Derby. So if you want to see the events that we're going to be presenting in the coming months, or look at anything we've done previously, just go to, you'll find it on the main BCS HQ website under the member groups, and that's the URL. And you'll find the aims of the branch, who we are as a committee, our AGMs, and we've got an AGM coming up in 2 weeks' time, as I say, upcoming and past events. Colin, over to you for your side.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So this is a joint event by BCS and the Chartered Institute for Information Security, again, the Nottingham, Derby and Leicester branch. So I'm Colin Robbins, and I'm co-chair of the group with Dawn O'Connor, who's also on the call, and it's been Dawn that you've probably heard from recently in terms of inviting you to the meeting, etc. And so yeah, it's the local branch, and we typically hold branch meetings, etc. But obviously during COVID, we've using this format. And Dawn has very kindly volunteered to write this session up for us. So for CiiSec members, there'll be a write-up of this available in the CiiSec Pulse magazine in the next issue. And finally, Paul did mention a break, and we're just going to do a little bit of advertising during the break. There'll be a couple of screens that show upcoming CiiSec events that might be of interest, and they're open to everybody, so you don't have to be a CiiSec member to attend. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Colin. That was the last of our opening slides. So Gary, if I can then pass the control over you to put on our first speaker, which is Tony Smith.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Colin. Hope everybody can hear me okay. So my name is Tony Smith, and I'd like to share with you my personal experience of being an information security professional during the coronavirus pandemic. I've worked for 3 organisations in the last 12 months in the public, charity and private sectors, covering hospitality, retail and local government. So I'll try and avoid mentioning any specific company names tonight. So it's early March probably only a week after the first confirmed UK case. And although there is no discussion at this point about a national lockdown, the office talk is about working from home. I hear IT discussing if the internet pipe is big enough to take the load. What IT systems can we access from home? Are the laptops and PCs configured to connect securely to those IT systems? What about printing? My thoughts turn to the information security policy. I'm a policy person. After all, policies reflect legal requirements, the organisation's risk appetite, and they also include all those painfully achieved security measures we fought hard to get. For example, users must have 50-character passwords written in ancient hieroglyphics that expire every 48 hours. Or users are allowed to use their own personal devices for work, subject to IT hitting it first with a mallet in accordance with HMG IA standard number 5. Just joking. Seriously though, do we have the capacity to keep the VPN always on? The policy says we must keep the VPN always on. What if users find out they can untick the user proxy server when connected to the internet? Not to worry, the policies say they mustn't. What about the clear desk policy? Does it apply at home? Should it apply at home? What about Alexa? Damn, no mention of smart voice assistants in our policy. What about the other people at home? A friend of mine said that during lockdown their home had become like a coffee shop, with all age groups accessing the Wi-Fi for quite different purposes. Also, our information security policy states that the default password must be changed on routers. Does this apply at home? To cut a long story short, COVID-19 infected our information security policy, but it survived, just. In addition, we created a unified acceptable use policy that included working in the office, working at home, using your company device, or indeed using your own device. Gary, could you launch the first poll question, please?
There we go. You should see it on your screen now. 3 options. Please place your chosen option and submit. And after a while, we'll collect the results and show you the doing well so far. 50% so far, 52, 54, 59 coming in quickly. 61, 63. So we're going to squeeze a few more in. Okay, I think that's as much as we're going to get. So I'm just going to close it and show you the results. And there we go.
Thank you, and apologies, I can't see the poll results at this end. So,
Oh, I see. I'll read it out for you then. So remained effective for users always working from home. It's 56%. Were not fully effective, but with some changes became okay, 38%. And finally, 6% had significant gaps.
thank you. Not bad, actually. I think the majority there are saying they've got good security had good security controls in place. That's good to know. Did you say 6% for option C?
Yes.
That's not bad at all then. So it's I wouldn't like to be in the 6%, but clearly that's quite a low figure. So that's quite promising.
Okay, I'm closing or hiding the poll now.
Thank you. So just want to fast forward to the present day. All those conversations about Zoom being the devil's work are in the distant past, although you've not quite finished writing that data protection impact assessment for it yet. Hopefully your conclusion for the DPA is a yes. Having spoken to many peers in the profession, I think we've done a great job in providing an ancillary function for what is a public health emergency. I hope the experience for you hasn't been too frustrating, and importantly, I hope you haven't been personally affected by the virus. But just before I ask Gary to launch the second poll question, let me leave you with a "thank your lucky star" kind of quote. It had taken several years to persuade the business to enable two-factor authentication on our webmail. When COVID came along, it was removed at the click of a button. Thank you. Gary, could you launch the second poll question, please?
Okay, the poll is showing 3 options again.
Thank you. So this is just bringing us right up to date. So based on your current information security practices, has the coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic A, improved your organisation's information security, B, left it relatively the same, or C, has still left you with some information security problems unresolved?
It's 60% voted so far. 64, 66, we're still moving. 70, we've beaten the first record. Okay, we'll give it 4 more seconds. 3, 2, 1, and closing the poll. And the results are in. So improved your organization's information security is 53%. 37% for left your organization's information security the same. And finally, 11% for left some information security problems unresolved.
Thank you. Not bad at all. So again, the majority, we're saying that we're in a good place. Thank you.
Okay, hiding the poll now. Okay, back to you, Tony.
Thank you. And that's a wrap for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. Paul Stevens speaking again. So David has arrived. So welcome, David. Are you ready to go? Can you just do a quick audio test? Just as we.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay. So Gary, can you hand over the presentation rights to David Alexander, please?
There we go. Right. Good evening, everybody. Can you see my screen? Let's do a quick double check, shall we?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Good. Oh, excellent. I work for a company called Urenco. We make, or I should say, we process enrich uranium for use in the nuclear power industry. I hasten to add that we are a civil nuclear organisation only. By law, we just deal with civil stuff. We only enrich uranium up to about 10%, which is more than enough for nuclear power. We also produce stable isotopes for use in things like medical, diagnostic and therapeutic treatments. We've got plants here in the UK, in Holland, in Germany and in the United States. But of course, because we're dealing with uranium and the kind of equipment that you use to enrich uranium, we are part of what you would call the high threat club, in that we have people who would really like to get our hands either on the kind of material that we're working with or on the technology we use to do the enrichment, because either they haven't got it or theirs is older and less efficient than the stuff that we're using. That presents us at normal times with interesting challenges, but of course at the moment that actually makes things more interesting. as I'm sure many of you have also had similar problems to us, but it's a question of how have we dealt with it, which is what we're going to talk about for the next 12 minutes or so. There we go. The first thing I want to talk about, of course, is it's important to know how to plan. Making a plan to deal with something depends on you actually having an approach by which you can make that plan. And of course, the first thing, which may sound obvious, is that the more time you have to gather information, to make and test your plans, the more likely they are to work. That is a very important fact to remember. It's no good waiting to the last minute. Where do I find useful information? I would recommend the first place to start would be things like the BCS Practitioner Certificate in Business Continuity Management, which has got information on things like BCP and DR, which of course includes working off-site, sometimes for long periods of time. I should, in the interests of full disclosure, say that I was actually part of the working group that helped develop this particular qualification. So in terms of the syllabus, the knowledge content, even the examination material, I helped put that together. So you could say I have a vested interest in mentioning that one. But of course, you'll also find useful stuff in ISO 27000, in ISO 22301 for business continuity management, and of course in the InfoSec common body of knowledge. And as you can see, I've put there in the corner a copy of a diagram, which is sort of the planning version for the Deming cycle. Make a plan, test it, review it, and update it. And there are various statistics that are quoted. I saw one from the Business Continuity Institute. That's another source of information as well. I should have put that on the slide, which said that anything up to 70% of these kind of plans fail when first tested. So it is important to think as far in advance as you possibly can. The 6 Ps rule also applies. Prior planning and preparation prevents poor performance. Again, that goes back to I first heard it when I was in the RAF. But now, what am I trying to achieve? What does good look like? What are the success criteria? So the usual things, SMART. And how do I ensure everyone knows and follows the plan? That is really important. And of course, you want to make sure that it's actually fit for purpose. Unlike this particular security control, that picture always makes me laugh. Now, have you produced something that's actually going to do what you wanted to do, both in terms of managing the risks, but also making sure that people can actually do the job that they set out to do? The next thing to say, of course, is that there is no substitute for experience. Learn from your mistakes and your successes. This is not the first time that I have worked on planning. I was part of a team that produced a plan for a global organization with something like 15,000 people when bird flu looked like it might become a pandemic back in 2005. Then I worked on a plan for MERS back in 2012 when I was working on UK smart metering. And in one capacity or another, I have either dealt with BCP and DR plans for more than 10 years during some of the various jobs that I've held. It's important to remember, of course, that what can go wrong will go wrong, and so will many other things that you haven't thought of. And remember that Murphy's Law applies, and as far as I'm concerned, Murphy was an optimist. There's a great saying here, no plan of operations extends with any certainty beyond the first contact with the main hostile force, which was said by that gentleman, Helmuth von Moltke the Elder, who was a German general back in the First World War, I think it was. You can be sure that no matter how good your plan, no matter how carefully you've thought about it, something will go wrong very quickly, and you will need to think on your feet. You will need to think on the fly. You will need to make stuff up as you go along. And the more you've put into your plan, the more you've thought about it, the more you've tested it and rehearsed it, the better at that you're going to be. In terms of Urenco, we started planning for this back in January. We thought that this was a possibility. I dug out some of the old work that I'd done, anonymized bits of it, and then presented it to people and said, what do you think? And they said, yeah, that's a good idea. So we put together a team of people from our group headquarters and also from our various production sites in order to put together a plan. First thing we did was a business impact assessment for COVID-19. What could the impact be on our staff, on our assets, and on the various services that we operate? And we thought about, well, how long do we think this might be necessary? And we actually went and looked back at things like historical precedents, and went and looked at stuff like the current information about working on developing vaccines. Found some very useful information from a research group in Oxford, which gave us an idea of how long might it take before this is actually all over. No, worst case scenario. We then looked at what do we need to do to review and update our policy for working from home. If people are going to be working home from an extended length of time, they may need to do things they wouldn't normally. How do we make sure that's possible, both in terms of safely for the link, but also about other things about what do they need to actually physically have at home with them? How do we protect those assets? We looked at our remote access technology and the security of it. Can we sustain secure remote access for the number of people that we want to work with for the appropriate length of time, in a way that is going to manage the risk that we're happy with? We also, by good fortune, we'd actually put some orders in prior to all this kicking off with various telcos in some countries to improve the bandwidth connections to some of our sites, and we contacted the telcos to see if there's any way to expedite getting that work done in preparation for this. In some cases, yes. In other cases, no. But any advantage is always worth having. We looked at what we had with the way of key personnel, both in terms of planning and for operations. We thought about hygiene, health and safety approach for plants and offices, about how we communicate the plan and educate people in it. Of course, there were regular progress reports and reviews for the executive committee to make sure that we were doing the right things, and also where necessary to get authorization for resources. And we thought about the possible impacts on personnel due to family issues, both in terms of illness and bereavement, children not being in school, all that kind of stuff. So we did our best to think wide and about not just the impact on business, but about the impact on our people. We put in place an early ban on international travel when we saw that things were starting to spread. We thought we don't want our people getting it, B, we didn't want those people then giving it to other people within the company. We also put a ban on non-essential inter-site visits. Lots of meetings got cancelled or changed to online. We also banned people attending conferences and going on training courses and stuff like this. We also put strong controls in place about external visitors coming to our sites, or for us going to visit third parties as well. We had to go through a very detailed process to get permission to do that kind of thing, and also to fill in some forms upon your return. And because, of course, we are a nuclear industry, we are subject to regulations, and of course we have 4 different regulators in the UK, the Netherlands, Germany, Australia, and America, and we needed to speak to all of them to find out what they would or would not allow, and what our plans were, how we proposed to do things, and not all of them had the same view. So our plan may have, in places, has varied from one country to another. And of course, crucially, we maintain proactive communications with our clients. We wanted to manage their expectations and reassure them of our intentions, so that they knew what we were going to do, that we were still going to deliver, that they could count on us, and that they could talk to us if they had concerns. And we've maintained an ongoing dialogue, and that's absolutely crucial. Make sure that people know what's going on. If they don't know what's going on, they will assume the worst. If you talk to them, they're going to be much happier, and we found that to be very true. We've had lots of positive feedback. Because we work with things like uranium and enrichment technology, we have people who need to work on site. Lots of these systems, because of their sensitive nature, they are not connected to the outside world in any way. They're completely standalone. You have to be on site to operate them. And we couldn't stop operations. Nuclear power stations around the world still need enriched uranium to operate. We supply about 1/3 of the world's nuclear power stations, and each one needs a considerable quantity, somewhere between 15 and 20 tons of uranium a year. That may sound like a lot, but don't forget it's one of the densest elements on the planet, so that's not actually a huge volume. We also looked at, for other means, for other people, how do we maintain social distancing and hygiene in our offices? So we actually implemented some software that limits the number of people that can go into a building. You have to book in advance. We don't have hot desking. We've all got our own individual desks. The software set up so that you can't go into the office if somebody at a desk adjacent to you is going to be there. And of course, it allows us to book essential visitors for maintenance, people like HVAC, lift engineers, and so on, so that we can get them into the building if we have to. We were quite cautious. We obviously kept a very close eye on what was happening in the world, and we sent people home 10 days before the government lockdown came into effect. And we thought about what people would need to take home to work for a long period of time. So we allowed them to take screens, docking stations, their office chair, headed stationary web cameras, etc. We maintain continuous awareness and education of our users. We had an outreach program which reinforces the policy and learnings. There are regular communications in senior management so that people do feel involved and connected still. We have ongoing team, site and organisational meetings, and we have items on mental health and resources, both in terms of emails and stuff that sits on our intranet. We have noticed some limitations. We haven't quite got the bandwidth we'd really like, so we limit the use of video conferencing. We ask people to use voice only when possible. We have done some reconfiguration of our networks on the fly to improve the connections and reduce the latency for conferencing. And on the whole, it's coping well with the systems we put in place. And we still do periodic reviews. So at least once a month, we'll look at what's working well, what isn't, what can we do better, and of course, what's changed. Because things do change over time. Are there any requirements? And again, I'll put that diagram in the corner there just as a reinforcement that you have to review and you have to update. These things are important. In summary, how's it going? Well, actually, we think that for us, it's going very well. We've got a very good record on the health of our personnel. Very few people have contracted COVID. We have unfortunately had one fatality. That was someone who had diabetes and was quite old and was susceptible, unfortunately. But other than that, that's considering how many people we employ worldwide, that's actually, we think, quite a good record. It hasn't had any adverse impact on our operations. We are still delivering on time and through quality to our clients, who have expressed that they're delighted. And as you can see further down, as I said, people have been renewing contracts. We've even picked up new contracts from people because they know that they can rely on us to deliver on time, and even in spite of what's happening now. There has been a minor impact on internal projects. There's been a little bit of slippage to some of them, and some of our third-party suppliers and service providers aren't coping as well in us. So that there has been a few issues of dependencies, and of course, on occasion, we can't do things because we can't let them on site. But other than that, in summary, for us, it is pretty much business as usual. So our plan has worked because we put so much effort into planning in advance. And I think that's the key message I want to put out there. And that's me done. I will hand you back over to the organizer.
So thank you very much, David. So Gary, if you can give me presenter rights again, please. Okay. I'm hoping you can see my slide.
We see a blue screen.
Yeah, I see a blue screen as well. Let me just try again. Try again.
Yes,
Does that
that's
work?
better.
Okay, so just to announce some events that are coming up in BCS. Our next month event is called Cyber Resilience, the Good, the Bad, the Ugly and the Retired. So yes, another security one. The guy who's speaking is Mr. Peter Wood, who has advertised this as an entertaining information security presentation on how to deal with severe impacts from unpredictable and unpreventable cyber threats. And as well as being a cyber consultant, Peter's a race driver and musician. So that's on the 16th of November 2020, and that is advertised on our website. The second one I should advertise to If it can move on. Oh, just excuse me a second. No, it's frozen. Hold on. Just going to pause. Hello, Gary. Is it possible you can bring my slides up because PowerPoint has crashed on me?
All right, let's see what I can do.
Whilst Gary's queuing up the slides, the second one I wanted to announce was that the branch is going to have its annual general meeting on the 2nd of November. If you are a branch member, you should have received a communique with joining details. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Colin, over to you.
Yeah, I wasn't really planning to read through all of these. I was really just sort of leave it on screen. But yeah, CiiSec has a program of webinars that we've been going through. There's sort of an innovation series called the Innovation Webinars, in which we get some sort of new upcoming companies to talk about some of their innovative ideas. And so we've got one of those coming up next Thursday week on data sovereignty and compliance. And some of the other branches are running events as well. Obviously, this is the Notts Leicester Derby branch. Our colleagues in the Northwest are continuing the sort of ongoing theme that CiiSec have been doing about cybercrime. Yeah, they're there for you to take a look at. If you are not a CiiSec member and you want to join, if you go to the CiiSec website, you'll find details there of how to register for them.
Thank you, Colin. So, Gary, as my PowerPoint's not working, could you possibly launch the first poll, please?
Okay, the first poll should be out. I can't actually see the poll myself because I'm sharing my screen, but I can see the results coming in.
I can see the poll.
Yeah, 57%, 63%. Doing well, 65%. You'll be very familiar with this question. We show it every event. 75%, still going up. And we'll come to a close in 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. Okay, ready for the next poll?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's the last one. Are you a BCS member? Everyone's quick off the mark this time. Okay, 80%. Very good. Okay, ending the poll in 4, 3, 2, 1.
Thank you, Gary.
Great.
Okay, so we're going to take a short break, just allow you to stretch your legs, because these things can be rather tiring when you sat down at a desk all day as well as sitting down in the evening. Please submit your questions using the questions pane in GoToWebinar, and we will be starting again at 1940. So we'll restart then. So take a break. Okay, I hope you've all had time to stretch your legs. It's now 1940, so we're going to resume again with our presentations. I believe the next person to be speaking is Matt. Matt, are you there?
I am.
Okay, Matt, over to you then, please. And we can see your screen.
Hi. Oh, good. Good evening. I'm going to talk a bit about how Nottingham Trent University went from a very traditional online very traditional on-campus presence to a almost totally online presence in a very short space of time, like everybody else. So at the start, back in March, it was clear that something was coming. None of us quite knew what. We had to adapt. It was very clear, and the things we had to do for us was quite a big shift. The university was a traditional institution. We didn't do an awful lot online. Students could study certain amounts of things online, but not their normal sessions with lecturers and such. So I titled this sort of Pulling the University from its Roots, which in effect is what we had to do. So where did we start? We had to quickly take stock of what sessions that we needed to move. Obviously, we have 3 years of undergraduates. We have further education students as well. And of course, we have postgraduates, all of which need to study in a slightly different way. Many of our academic colleagues were not used to teaching in this manner. They very much like to stand at the front of a group in a lecture theatre with their slides and obviously talk about the material. But this, obviously, in light of COVID, meant that things had to change very quickly. So what did we do? Like many others, we dug out the contingency plans and the business continuity, and we blew all the dust off because they'd been sat in a cupboard for many years since the likelihood of other pandemics that never materialized. From an IT perspective, we had practiced our DR plans regularly, just like everybody else. However, this wasn't like any other situation that we as a university had planned for. We had contingency plans for what would happen if the campus closed, or we had to shut certain sites or buildings. But I guess our contingency plans never really counted on the fact that nobody would be on campus. So this meant that we were a little bit out of our comfort zone. In fact, we were a long way out of our comfort zone. From one Monday evening, we got the heads up that campus needed to be closed. The Tuesday morning, the communications went out that we were moving to online teaching. At that moment, when that announcement was made, we weren't actually ready to start teaching online. Within 48 hours, we had to have all our academic colleagues very quickly trained in using Teams to do seminar groups of students. Our virtual learning platform had to be scaled up, and our online recording for lectures also had to be scaled out so that more of our colleagues were able to actually use that to record their sessions so that students could play them back at their leisure. This really led us on to where we are. Nobody was quite prepared. Fortunately, at that time in March, we only had 2 or 3 weeks of teaching of term 2 remaining. We managed to sort of get through that period. It was a little bit bumpy at times, but it did give us to the Easter break where we actually were able to put in plans properly, ready for term 3. However, what we hadn't counted on in all of this was where our plans would change or require the change of policy. So as an InfoSec person, policy is really important. It's important to us and it's important to the business. But very clearly, like some of the other speakers have mentioned, our policy didn't quite allow for some of the things that we had to do and the new ways we were working. At Nottingham Trent, we had a very rigorous password change policy that is set at 90 days. Very clearly, that was going to be a challenge. Whilst everybody was working off campus, actually changing your password to all the systems that require it is a really big challenge for us. So very quickly, we had to change the password policy to remove the 90 days. We are still working in that manner, and we do need to revert back to password changes once we are well into the start of term 1 like we are now. The next challenge we had was allowing software installations of our teaching software and packages that students ordinarily can use in many of our resource suites on campus. They now have to install them on their machines at home. We also, as an institution, have shipped out to date over 1,000 laptops to students to enable them to study where they didn't have their own laptops, and of course staff that ordinarily didn't have a laptop that you were used to using desktop on campus. Ordinarily, we as IT would always manage our software. We push it out, we install it, we keep it up to date. Moving to online had its own challenges. The way we installed software didn't quite work as well. We had to scale that out and use cloud delivery mechanisms for that. But we were able to do it. One thing we further had to do was actually pretty much allow anybody to install any software that they wanted, which obviously goes against all of our policies. But we do it in an audited way such that we know who's done what, when they installed it, and then whether they ever use that software, so that we're able to actually manage that. If we don't have licenses, we can resolve those. One further one that presented not as much of a challenge as we first thought was in the early days, whilst we're sending passwords out, whilst we're sending laptops out, you can't log into a university machine unless you're on campus. We had to call people up, and after validating they were who we thought they were, we actually asked them to give us their password, which very few people actually picked us up on about why they would need to do that. And then we went through some other validation with them. And when all this is done, obviously we have an awful lot of user education to revisit. We also gave the ability to our local IT technicians, the guys on the ground, to be able to actually change people's passwords, which ordinarily they can't. It's only the service desk. And a big one for us was the VPN. As an institution of 32,000 students and almost 3,000 staff, we actually didn't use the VPN an awful lot. However, once this pandemic started and we had to give a lot more people a lot more access to on-premise devices, either to continue doing experiments or to use specialist software that we couldn't license by some other means, we needed to give people more access to the VPN. We had to relicense that very quickly, but that was done quite well. We also have a PCI DSS card data environment, which ordinarily, as those of you involved in PCI DSS, you should never allow remote connections. However, in order that we could still process payments for students, and of course, back in the time in the spring, we were still looking forward to our new students that have just joined us and their ability to be able to book their accommodation ahead of time. So we had to give access to our CDE. We have done it in a compliant manner, but it was something that had to be done real quick while still maintaining the security. And finally there, we have massively increased our use of VDI, which is remote desktop over the web, which also had massive challenges in terms of still making our software available, yet anybody can use it in a secure manner. All of these things, along with many others, really took its toll on everybody, and making sure everybody's mental health remained okay and such was a really big challenge. And the final point is about, did we have to change any other policies as a result of working in this new way? And on the whole, no, we haven't. We have not reissued any new policy during this time. And the reason for this is our approach to policy has always been focused about not where you are accessing data or information from, but rather who you are and what it is you are trying to access. Therefore, BYOD, or actually using an on-campus machine but remotely, wasn't a challenge. Using VPN and other secure portals, Microsoft, obviously, we all use Office 365 and such, made all of that real easy and enabled us to do it with very little or no policy change. That's all I've got right now, so I'll hand back over.
Thank you, Matt. So, Gary, if you can give control over to Darren, who's our final speaker this evening. And can I remind everyone, please, to submit questions in the questions pane.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Darren.
Wonderful. And I guess you can see my screen?
We can see your screen, so please proceed.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paul. So I'm Darren James. I work for a company called SpecOps, as you may have seen from the screen that I'm sharing at the moment. And we're a software vendor, a security software vendor. And our software is really based in the identity and access management and password realm of IT software. So let's crack on with the slideshow. So this is a presentation that I've put together to talk about the impact on business IT since COVID-19, and it really follows along from a lot of the themes that the last three presenters have been talking about. So hopefully I won't repeat too much, but there are certainly things that have been said so far that you might find I repeat a little bit, but hopefully I'll give you a little bit more insight. One of the nice things from my perspective is that I've spoken to all sorts of shapes and sizes of companies, coming from, going from small schools up to universities, to healthcare, to government, to retail, to all sorts of businesses over the past few months. And I've worked in IT for over 20 years. And there you go, there's a little bit about me there. So I used to work with Paul over 10 years ago at an energy company. But for the past 10 years, I've worked at SpecOps, and as it says there, I specialise in Active Directory tools, particularly based around identity and access management. And yeah, I'm loving it. One of the nice things for me, or one of the sort of unusual things for me, I suppose I should say, is that I've worked at home for the last 10 years. So SpecOps run a virtual office in the UK. So this whole working from home scenario hasn't been a huge kind of shunt as far as I'm concerned. I've always used the direct access to access the on-prem systems in our Stockholm office, but I've also used our cloud-based systems as well. So for me personally, it's not been a massive shock to the system. But talking to, as I say, a lot of people out there, I certainly understand how big a shock it's been to a lot of organisations. So hopefully I can give you a bit of an insight on that today. So COVID-19, what are the challenges? Well, as we've all been talking, working from home has been had a big impact on how people work. Do we have the kit? How do our users access the data? How do we support our end users, and how do we secure our network? So it's these 4 points that I'm going to sort of cover today, and how I've seen our customers react, and to a certain extent how SpecOps might be able to help you and other people as well. So by no means this is a SpecOps sales pitch, so please don't switch off. But hopefully I'll give you some good insights. So working from home, do we have the kit? So back at the beginning of March, we saw our leads decline as spec ops. You know, we were very, very busy up all the way through till March, and then COVID hit. And it wasn't because the need for our software solutions went away, but there was a sudden priority to get all of our customers needed to get staff working from home. So all of the things that the last three speakers have just been talking about, and I'm sure you're already aware of, there's now a massive rush to deploy laptops, and other remote working solutions. So all sort of IT projects are put on hold. Unrelated changes to those to that immediate need were frozen, and so that was the main focus that we saw for most of the businesses that we spoke to. But it didn't matter whether those laptops were purchased or leased, or you were using a bring your own device strategy. All of it introduced extra time and extra cost. And so again, this put an increased pressure on the IT department and organizations as a whole. And it wasn't just laptops. Many companies had to try and get the supporting kit. So again, I think as previously mentioned, you needed to make sure that people had a safe place to work at home. You know, they weren't just perched at the end of their bed. So a lot of organizations needed to make sure that people had a safe working environment, their desks, chairs, monitors, mice, docks, all of those things. And of course, one of the key factors when rolling out laptops these days is making sure that they're encrypted. So with Windows 10, you've got things like BitLocker, but there are also other third-party encryption methods as well. So lots of organizations had to rush to get encryption working and be able to be managed remotely as well. And then when all of this started to settle, then a bit more focus on the underlying security of this new normal. And forgive the sort of overly used words there, but a bit more of you know, how do we deal with this now? Started to set in, and we started to get more questions coming back to us. So how do our users access data and apps? So this rapid change of the way that most companies work, or many companies work, exemplified the diverse ways that apps were used and how data was accessed. It's found that they needed to give access to on-prem systems as well as many cloud-based applications, and we saw a rapid increase in cloud-based apps. So things like Zoom that was mentioned earlier, Teams. There was mass rollouts of those sorts of systems. So and of course those systems lend themselves very well to people working from home. But that isn't the be-all and end-all for a lot of businesses. They still have on-prem systems that their users need to access on a daily basis. So they needed to figure out how to securely authenticate those users. Of course, we have passwords and all of the problems that we have with passwords. And so some companies looked at multi-factor, or at least two-factor authentication for those. But of course, two-factor systems or two-factor identity services aren't always equal. You know, if you think about biometrics, Face ID, Touch ID, Google Fingerprint are all things that we use every day, versus, you know, what's your favorite film, or what's the first car you ever bought, secret questions and answers. Obviously, biometrics are much more secure than something that you know, the three factors rolled into one, something you have, something you know, and something you are. That's in a biometric is much better than just something you know that could be socially engineered from Facebook or whatever it might be. So yeah, we needed to figure out those sorts of things, but we also needed to figure out how to handle privacy of our data. And whether it was backed up, all this critical information that we've suddenly shifted to the cloud and made available to our users working from home, how we back that information up, where it was stored, who had access to those backups. So there were lots of other pieces to this puzzle, particularly around privacy and data protection. And of course, on the on-prem side of things, we needed to figure out how people got access to our on-prem resources. So was it by using a VPN? Was it by using VDI, as Matt's just spoken, you know, that mixture of the two? But how do users authenticate to the VDI solution? Again, is it just by password, or do you have some sort of dual factor or multi-factor system? And also, how do people connect to that VPN? Is it an always-on based system that's linked to a certificate on your machine or your computer? But then how does that work with people who are using bring your own device? They haven't got a domain joined or a corporate managed machine. So do you have to support both methods of VPN? So all of these presented real challenges to a lot of our customers. And that brings us really onto the third point. So how do we now support our users? So now we have all of our users working from home in various ways across various systems and across various platforms. The next big issue that really jumped out to customers that I speak to was password expiry. And I think, again, Matt sort of led me nicely onto this subject. They did have a 90-day expiry, but at the moment, they've had to switch their passwords to never expire. And of course, the big problem for that, or the main reason I should say for that, is the fact that you now have lots of users with cache credentials, and the fact that they never get any expiration warnings because they're not connected to the network anymore. You're not going to get that balloon that pops up that says your password's going to expire in the next 14 days. Do you want to change it now? That just doesn't work, doesn't happen anymore. And of course, if a user does remember to change their password, maybe you've got an email notification system that goes out. You know, there are plenty of scripts out there. There's no real way of if a user's password's expired and the user's has their password reset by an IT admin staff, it's a very difficult process that they have to get through to make sure that that cache credential on that laptop gets updated. So again, there's all of this new way of working that people had to adapt to. Of course, the other problem that we had, and again, what Matt kind of alluded to as well, is what happens when the service desk reset that password. You know, how does the service desk know that the person on the other end of the phone is who they say they are? You can't really say with you know, with more than sort of 100 people, oh yeah, I just recognize those their voices. You really need to have a robust way of verifying somebody who's at the other end of the phone. And looking at the type of passwords people use, you know, password one with a capital P meets all of the standard Microsoft rules. But of course, you, me, and the gatepost know that that's not a terribly good password. And of course, when that password does expire, there's nothing to stop them changing it to password 2 with a capital P. So how can we fix things like that? And then, of course, on the side of that, with this massively rushed out disk encryption process that's been put into place, you also had to deal with recovery keys for BitLocker or Semantic or whatever your preferred encryption solution was. So how do we handle those types of calls to the service desk? So these are all kind of you know, real problems that that our customers faced. So it was really all of these events that tied into a kind of big upsurge in really at the end of April, I suppose, where our business picked back up again, because Spec Ops produce solutions that help organizations solve these sorts of problems. So first of all, in our response to COVID, we made 2 of our products completely free of charge to anybody who wanted to use them. So the first of those was Spec Ops Password Auditor. And the nice thing about Spec Ops Password Auditor is that it gives your IT staff or your IT admins some visibility about who is currently running a compromised password in your environment. So straight away, admins could run this inside their environment. They could compare the password hashes of their users to a database of 738 million unique leaked hashes, and it would tell them who those users are. Well, it doesn't crack the password, it's just comparing the hashes, but it does tell them which user is currently using a compromised password. And from there, they could then reach out to those users and ask them to change it, run the report again to make sure it's something better. But there's also another nice report built into Password Auditor to help with the expiry issue that we talked about. So it'll tell the admins which users' passwords are going to expire up to 365 days in advance. So if there are any VIPs on there or people that you know are going to run into problems, you can reach out to them before that's going to happen or before they get into trouble. Password notification is an automated emailing system for password expiry as well. So again, completely free of charge. You don't have to worry about learning PowerShell or creating your own scripts. It's a group policy based email system. And as I say, it's completely free, no advertising on it. You can just download it, run it, and away you go. And of course, all of this led to also more interest in our other solutions. So our SpecOps authentication platform, which is a system that provides flexible multi-factor authentication across a number of different scenarios. So in particular, we saw a lot of interest in Ureco, which is a self-service password reset solution. And one of the key features of that, which sort of sets us apart from our competitors and which really attracted a lot of people to this solution, was the fact that at the end of a self-service password reset, it can update the cached credential on your local Windows workstation. So we've now got we can now keep our password expiry, and we can now allow our users to reset their own passwords securely, and it won't cause us any problems when our users aren't connected to the corporate network. Another thing as well is secure service desk. So we can also use those secure multi-factor identity services, so things like Touch ID, Face ID, Duo, Okta, Verify. All of those systems can now be used to verify users at the other end of the phone. So now you haven't got a face-to-face option anymore, or seeing someone calling you from an internal number, you can still verify people at the other end of the phone as a service desk agent. And then finally, we have another solution called SpecOps Password Policy and Breached Password Protection. So these allow you to have much better password or even passphrase policies within your organization, so that you can remove things like password 1 with a capital P, or SpecOps 1 with a capital S, or Welcome 1, or Summer 2019, or COVID 2019, I think is another popular password these days. So, or 2020, I should say. So now you can get rid of all of those weak passwords, construct a passphrase policy, so 3 random words that mean something to you but nothing to anybody else, and break all of those bad habits where people just start their password with a capital letter, put a bunch of lowercase characters in the middle, and a number at the end. That can now be a thing of the past. And with all of these tools combined, we can have a really good solution which helps our customers adapt to this new normal again. So have there been sort of any opportunities created? Is there any good news from this pandemic? Well, obviously it's a terrible, terrible disease. It's impacted millions of people across the world, and we're still in a very bad way globally. But from an IT perspective, I have seen a few positives repeated over to me over the past few months. And of course, a huge respect goes out to people in the hospitality, travel, sports and arts-based businesses who continue to have a very tough time of it. But a lot of office-based businesses seem to have adjusted to a more flexible way of working. And the importance of a central office seems to have diminished. And the hope that the home office has become of much greater importance. So that flexibility of working from home seems to be much more widely allowed these days, which I think is good for a lot of people and potentially good for a lot of businesses. Even when COVID goes away, hopefully, a lot more people will be able to still use that flexible way of working. Cloud-based applications have seen a huge boost. We've already talked about Teams rollouts and Zoom rollouts, and I think that's a good thing. Especially these collaborative platforms have taken a big step up in the last few months. And then also, finally, I should say, I think more focus has been placed on improving the user experience. So that doesn't mean necessarily weakening security, but applying security in layers So rather than relying on a perimeter in your office, you're now looking at various different ways of protecting your users, protecting the data, and protecting the access that they have. And this was also allowed there to be greater readiness to accept change, I think, from the business side of things as well. So previously, if someone wanted to roll out a new password policy, there used to be massive pushback from the business. But now we see a much more accepting change for anything IT. So I think as far as that goes, there's been a much greater acceptance from the end users and the business to take these sorts of things on the chin and learn from them and appreciate what they're actually trying to do, or what the company's trying to do for those users. So personally, I see lots of businesses adapting very well, and it certainly gives me a lot of hope for the future. So thank you very much. That's all I have to say. Back to the presenter.
Okay, thank you, Darren.
No problem at all.
So Gary, all the panelists, if you can please turn on your cameras, and we'll go into the Q&A session.
Right, we have some questions, and we've got everybody online. Excellent. Okay, first question is from Alan. Did you keep track of the stuff that staff took off site when they left to work at home? That was a question raised during David's talk, but let's see if everyone on the panel can answer.
Certainly from, I am unmuted. Certainly from a spec ops perspective, yes, we did as a company. So we asset track all of our equipment, and we made sure that all of our equipment was tracked when it was taken home.
Yeah, we did the same thing. So as people left the building, we were checking A, what they got, and B, what the serial numbers on it were for use. And again, with reference to the comment about, are we sort of going to go back to working full time in an office? Probably not. So a decision's been made that actually we're probably going to just assign that kit to people at home and replace it in the office, so that when they come in, they don't have to shuffle stuff backwards and forwards.
I'll answer from my perspective there, Gary. We made a policy about 3 years ago that we would no longer issue people with desktops. So most people got laptops which are tagged. So it gave us flexibility in our office environment, and that worked out great for this because people just kept their laptops and took them home with them. I think probably a little bit less diligence on terms of the consumables like screens and keyboards. I think that's going to be a bit of honesty when we go back. But in terms of desktops, or shall I say laptops, yeah, we've got a well-documented process for actually issuing those out.
I think, yeah, the cost of screens and mice and such, like, or sort of keyboards and mice and such, it would cost you more to keep track than it is to trust people, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I can remember going back to the office recently, and it looks like there's been a lot of monitors pillaged. So all of those monitors on the desks have all disappeared. I think people have popped back into the office to collect all the extra monitors for sure. One other thing I would say is the starters and leavers process. We've had to make some changes to that. I think particularly with leavers, clearly it's not as easy now to get the equipment back off a lever with everybody working from home.
Yeah, I concur with that. I'm a similar position to Darren because we have a lot of people who do home working. So leavers who don't go to an office is something that's been built in. So basically they ship with a cardboard box in the last week before they leave, and the disk is encrypted anywhere on the laptop. So you just pop it in the post and it's returned.
Yeah, I mean, we use remote wipes for our phones and our computers, and we also encourage people, or we actively stop people writing to the C drive. They have to use a cloud system, so we redirect their desktops to their OneDrive, all of those sorts of things. We use known folders, so yeah, they'll struggle to save anything locally to their C drives. So even if they did manage to, we can remote wipe it, but most of the time all of the data is kept on the corporate managed OneDrive anyway, as far as we're concerned.
Okay, I want to thank Alan for that question. Next one is from Ashley, and Ashley asks all panelists, have they seen a rise in phishing and variant attacks since the COVID pandemic? And have they seen a higher or possibly lower rate of users falling for such attacks?
We've certainly, in the very early days of working from home, saw a surge in attempted phishing attacks, spear phishing attacks, especially those looking to try and change bank account details to divert payments. We saw probably for about a month or so that kind of thing on the rise. But again, as part of the awareness, we've made people aware, and people were very good at reporting it, spotting it, and we've got one of those sort of report phishing buttons added into the Outlook so that people can send that stuff across, and we've looked at it. So I haven't seen as much recently, but yes, certainly initially people were obviously trying to capitalize on what was happening. Certainly the criminals were.
Yeah, we've had a lot of reports of that from certainly our customers. And as I mentioned, that's where our secure service desk function, but especially social engineering of the support desk, someone ringing up claiming to be somebody else. The kids are screaming in the background, and oh, can you just reset my password for me, please? I've just got to sort the children out. And the service desk person gets flustered, they bypass the security, and away they go. So yeah, we've had a few reports of that coming from various customers.
I think the thing I've noticed most is actually being the home user, not in terms of my work, but as an individual in the house. We get a lot more calls coming through to the home phone, which I never use. And it's been Inland Revenue, allegedly, telling me how I've fraudulently made a claim for a business loan, and the police will be turning up, and press 1 to speak to an advisor. I've had many calls telling me my internet connection's been hacked. On one occasion, they told me it was BT when I used Virgin. So you've got to be skeptical who phones you up, is basically what I'd say.
Yeah, we seem to have a peak in April for some reason. In March, the figures for sort of unsolicited emails and suspicious emails was quite low, but we suddenly had a peak in April, and then it seemed to drop off again in May. But then since May, it's steadily rose again, and we're doing quarterly phishing simulation tests on users at the moment. Although I have to say we have to actually lower some of the defences to let the phishing simulation software work. Just for the phishing simulation software, and not for regular, not the regular defences.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to buck the trend a little bit and just say that we actually saw a massive drop in phishing attempts early days, and it didn't start rising again until August, and now it's up to normal levels again.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Mark asks, the challenge I found with COVID was not the initial DR plan, but then how that needed to evolve. Wondering if this was also the experience of the others, and if so, what it means for the future DR plans.
Again, I think referring back to the point I made, that the earlier you started planning and the more experience you got, the more likely your plan was to survive and be robust. We've had to make very few changes to ours in the way it works and what it does, really responding mostly to change, although we did have some issues with network bandwidth that we fixed. But no, we haven't found any kind of real issues where we've had to say, oh my goodness, tear it up and make major changes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think if you had most organisations that had some sort of DR plan in the first place were normally pretty well prepared. You've still got the, site contingency plans, making sure all of your systems are backed up, testing all of your restores. All of those things are still valid. If you've shifted some of your systems to, the cloud, let's say, the only thing that I think some organisations have noticed is that they now need to, make sure that those cloud systems are backed up. A lot of the time they're not that very well backed up. So what happens if that cloud provider fails? Can you get your data back? I think that's the only real challenge that some people have found, and it's something that you should address when you're selecting that cloud provider or a shared service provider.
Yeah, there's that old saying, isn't there? Failing to plan is planning to fail.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it's shown up some of the weaknesses in the infrastructure, because people tend to think about the business applications. So one of the things that we spotted was that probably about half of our business apps, they need a VPN access to actually get to them. So the VPN suddenly becomes a vital service where you've got the majority of your users coming through. So what it does is expose things that need a higher degree of attention than they've had previously.
Yeah, it's very true. Yep.
All right, moving on to the next question. Next one's from Conrad. I still see the idea that passphrases, 3 random words, discussed online as not secure unless they have special characters. This seems counterintuitive. What do the panelists think?
I guess that's one for me. Well, there's 2 schools of thoughts. The 3 random word thing has come from the NCSC and NIST over the past 4 years. I like it. You're really changing the way that people look at passwords, but you're also opening potentially yourself up to other forms of attack. So the weakness that people refer to is that, well, if you say your 3 random words have got to be 3 6-character words, then it's quite easy for someone to download the English dictionary, filter out any words that are less than 6 characters. Then you end up with something like 75,000 words, and then a computer can shuffle through all those words in all of the different permutations in a pretty quick manner. But of course, that's based on dictionary words. So I always say to people when they ask me about how should I use passphrases, is it goes down to education of your users in the long run. I try to tell them not to use dictionary words, or if they are going to use dictionary words, just use 1 out of the 3. So maybe choose the first car you ever bought, and then your the first school that you went to, and then maybe your mother's maiden name or something like that. So 3 random words that mean something to you but nothing to anybody else. But none of those words, or very few of those words, are going to be dictionary words, and so that's where that weakness comes from. Now, if you are sort of obviously a much stronger password will be if you chuck some complexity in, so you put a special character or a number in there somewhere. Sure, that's going to spice it up so that random 3-word brute force attack isn't going to work if you do introduce a special character. But you have to think about the different attack vectors. So they'd need to kind of steal the database really to produce enough, or to be able to attack that database directly. So again, providing you've got strong physical security of your Active Directory, and that you're not storing passwords with reversible encryption, you make it as hard as possible. Then again, you're going to be in pretty good stead. The other thing you need to think of, if you do start introducing complexity to passphrases, then users are more likely to write those passphrases down. The whole point of a passphrase is it's simple to type, easy to remember. If you start saying it's got to have a number and a capital letter and a special character in it, people will then start thinking, okay, 3 random words, that's 20 odd characters, but I've got to spice it up with some numbers and special characters. And then they'll end up writing it down on a post-it note and sticking it around their monitor or underneath their keyboard. And then you've got another attack vector to worry about, probably a more serious one than someone running off with your AD database. So I do think the 3 random word thing is a good piece of advice. But as with always, you need to give some users some guidance and some education. Try and avoid dictionary words if you can. Use names, and yeah, if you can chuck an extra character, a special character in, brilliant, but don't enforce it.
Yeah, I've really wanted to embrace the 3 random word system, but obviously a lot of IT systems are still requiring those special characters and a combination of uppercase and lowercase and numbers. So I do think we're in a scenario now. I don't know if you could describe it as maybe we're in a scenario where we've got the worst of both worlds at the moment. We're sort of trying to transition to this three random words, but a lot of IT systems are wanting you to put in numbers and special characters. So yeah, I'd really like to adopt it, but it is difficult at the moment when the IT systems themselves haven't caught up with that.
Sure, and you have to bear in mind as well things like PCI. They still haven't caught up with, you know, PCI DSS requires at least 2 characters in a password. So your PCI users will still need to have you know, a different policy compared to your other users, for instance. But yeah, Tony, maybe you should come and speak to me. Come along to one of my demos, and I'll show you what we can do. But you know, there's also things that you can do as well, like reward people for using so still support passwords, so still support shorter passwords, but reward people for setting a passphrase by letting them keep it for longer. Do things like that. So you can, so if you use a less than 14 character password, you expire it every 30 to 45 days. But if you use a 15 character or more passphrase, then let them keep it for a year. And that way you kind of push people in the right direction. You know, if you say to someone, just add a couple more characters, you won't have to change it for a year, then you can certainly drive your users in the right direction.
I was going to ask you, Darren, you mentioned the 14 character password length as a minimum to be before. Is that still a recommendation?
Well, 15 is actually the minimum it should be. Yeah, there's a lot of, some people make that mistake where they think, yeah, 14, they've read it in a piece of, you know, in a document, and it's less of an issue these days, but it's still an issue, especially if you've upgraded your Active Directory over years and years and years. You've probably still got some backwards compatibility stuff still enabled, and that's where this 14 character limit comes into play. So yeah, always try and get your user to set something more than 15 or 15 or more, and then you'll be in a much better place. But this is all to do with how Active Directory hashes your passwords. So yeah, 14 characters or less, very bad. 15 and above, much, much better.
All right, thank you, Darren. We've got 2 minutes left. See if we can get in 1, maybe 2 questions. So from Ashley, question to Matt, asking, has Matt, has integration into Janet JISC network been affected as a result of remote networking?
Not as far as Nottingham Trent is concerned, and nor have I heard any particular stories that have suggested it's been affected. JISC do a great job of protecting the network from the nasty actors out there, but we certainly haven't experienced any issues.
Okay, thank you. A question from Cami to Darren. How does remote wipes and BYOD work?
Well, you still need to manage those devices. So I'm thinking about enrolling people in Intune, for instance. So you can, you don't allow your users to, or your users with bring your own device type systems to access corporate resources until they've enrolled in Intune. And once you've got them enrolled in Intune, then you can remotely wipe the business data on those devices. But yeah, you're quite right. If you've not got that way of managing your business data, then yeah, the world is that user's oyster. If you just give them VPN access without any controls, then you're purely basing your security on goodwill.
Okay, very good. Right, I think we can squeeze in one quick one from Tracy. Let's see, got to find that question. Is information security the silver lining of COVID-19? Yes or no answer from each panelist.
No.
I'd say
I would
no.
say, yeah, I'd say no as well.
I'd agree.
I think it's made it worse in many circumstances. Anyways, sorry, Tony, go for it. I'm talking too much.
I might as well say yes, just to throw a counter argument in.
There's always one.
All right. All right, thank you very much, everyone. Paul, back to you.
Yeah, so thank you very much for joining this evening. I've quite enjoyed it. I think one of the things I've learned during this COVID crisis is how to organise a webinar and how to manage it, and it's a lot more difficult than you think. So thanks for joining. As I say, well, I've put there's links in the chat in terms of our next events. If you've got ideas about stuff you want us to look to program in 2021, then please let us know. The contact details are on our website. Colin, are you still there? I didn't know if you've got any final words from CiiSec.
No, just thank you very much to everyone for attending.
Okay.
Watch space for future events.
Okay, so thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening. So Gary, please close the broadcast.